Hello, and welcome to the triumphant return of the Wheel of Time Diaries after a little bit longer off than I would have liked, considering how much I enjoyed the Fires of Heaven. Now, if you're watching this and you've watched any of the other videos that I've had with this new camera angle, I know the screen looks a little bit more orange tinted than it did. I'm trying a different color balance on the camera settings this week because for up to this point, this angle has been a little bit more white balanced than I would like, so I'm testing out something a little bit different this week. Either way, that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is to talk about New Spring for the first out of 2 diaries for this book. I was originally going to be doing 3 diaries for New Spring. Turned out to not be the case because I have been plowing through. I'm over halfway through the book in just this 1 week, and if I had done any reading over all 3 days of the weekend rather than just 2 days of my weekend, I could just postpone this video until Wednesday and record it Wednesday evening and finish this book and do it all in one. That's how quickly I'm going through it, which is a big surprise in a couple of regards, but I decided ultimately not to do that, not only because I didn't end up reading one of the days over the weekend, but also because cutting down the diaries for New Spring from 3 down to 2 affects my video schedule in August enough as is. If I were to cut it down to 1 diary, that would complicate other matters a heck of a lot more than I want to see them complicated. Anyway, that is all besides the point. Let me start off talking spoiler free, of course, my first impressions of New Spring, and that is that it is underrated. A lot of people give this book flack for various different reasons. I know people who read it in publication order, read the series Wheel of Time in publication order, coming with New Spring at the end of Crossroads of Twilight. People were like, yeah, but people need Knife of Dreams sooner than later by the time they get to that point in the series. So having them read another tangent that is a prequel in New Spring is not the advice that most people give for the series. And I see the reasons why people would make that assertion, even though I haven't read up through book 10 quite yet. But really, even if book 10 is as bad as everybody says, I would love New Spring by the time I came to it in that part of the series, because this book is great and it deals with characters that I really enjoy and a time period that I'm really enjoying exploring, all things considered. I'm not going into spoilers quite yet, so don't worry about that, but the setting and the time period in which this takes place as a prequel, at least so far as I have read, has been great. Got to see a lot of great dynamics between certain characters and certain aspects of certain groups of people, we'll put it that way, that have been really fascinating and that I personally really enjoyed getting to explore insofar as we've been able to. And even though I'm only a little over halfway through the book at this point, I am genuinely really sad that we did not get the full prequel trilogy or whatever it was that Robert Jordan was planning for this. It wasn't meant to just be one standalone prequel. It was meant to be a whole trilogy that kind of led up into Eye of the World, if my information is correct and if I'm remembering the information that I got on that subject correctly. Forgive me if I'm wrong there, but when it comes right down to it, I am actually genuinely sad that we're not getting the rest of the prequel series because Robert Jordan unfortunately passed away before he could write it. It makes you consider that maybe if the slog is as bad as people say, and if he had written some of that stuff a little bit more concisely, if he might have had time to finish the series and also finish the prequels, would have been really, really cool. But that is such a, that is such a wacko kind of, alternate universe that we would be living in if that were the case. But that is basically my spoiler-free first impressions. I've enjoyed the characters, I've enjoyed the setting, I've enjoyed the interactions, I've enjoyed the little bits of information about certain things that have been either questions or questions that I didn't know I had from previous in the series. And of course, I should also clarify, this is coming from somebody who's only read through the Fires of Heaven so far. So if you haven't been on this channel before, or if you haven't been following the Wheel of Time Diaries, hi, hello, welcome to episode 29, I think, if I'm not mistaken, of the series. I've been doing spoiler talks and diaries on the whole series as I've been reading through through for the first time, and that has been all the way through the Fires of Heaven so far. Going to be reading Lord of Chaos in a couple months here. Well, I'm going to be starting reading it a little bit before that, but Diaries for Lord of Chaos will be coming out in, I believe, 2 months from next week. Of course, next week is when the second diary for this will be coming out, because I'm going to be finishing this very soon. There's the chance that I'll finish it shortly after that video publishes, and then I'll be making that next video basically right immediately then. So without further ado, I think I've gone on rambling at the introduction for this video long enough, we'll say. So I want to jump a little bit more into the spoiler talk and actually talk about some of the concept and the conceit for the book in a spoiler context, actually saying what it is about. And then I'm going to get into my thoughts on everything that I have read thus far. And it has been quite a bit. It's been over half of the book, like I said. Spent about 8 hours reading over the past week or so when I started the book. So I've definitely had a lot of time to think about this stuff. My apologies, had a little bit of app issues with Task Manager. Wasn't sure if any of this was actually working. If any of that footage is buggy, or if a little bit of the coming footage is buggy or framey or anything like that, it's because a certain process on my computer is deciding to run that I can't end for some reason right when I'm recording. So that's efficient. Anyways, like I said, the conceit for New Spring is essentially following as a prequel Moraine and Lan and Swan from the main series. Moraine, of course, is the Blue Aja Aes Sedai who locates essentially Mat and Perrin and Rand, of course, and Lan is her warder. And then Swan Sanche is the Amerlin seat for those first few books until, well, if you're watching this video and you're watching the spoilers, you have at least read through Fires of Heaven. That's all I've read through. So if there's any more context that, comes with someone trying to read this after book 7 or after book 10, do not tell those to me, of course, because I haven't read that far in the series yet. But at least as of book 5, well, Swan's obviously been ousted from the Amerlin seat position by then. But this book starts off a little bit earlier than that, around the time that Rand is born. So Moraine, of course, is a much younger Aes Sedai, and so Swan is as well. And it turns out the two of them have been in the White Tower for the exact same amount of time and have been leveling up, so to speak, in basically the same ways at the same times, both going from novice to accepted. And in this book, at least as far as I've read so far, going from accepted to full Aes Sedai at essentially the same time. And that means that these characters are much younger. Moraine is maybe in her mid-20s, I believe, in this book, which means she's maybe in her late 40s, early 50s at the very oldest in the main series. At least that's what my very rough top of the head math kind of calculated when some of these years and dates and stuff were kind of brought up. So I didn't realize that Moraine and Swan especially were so young comparatively until this takes place. And the reason why this all happens, like I said, is because it's around the birth of Rand al'Thor, which means that the Aiel are in and around the White Tower, and there's battles going on, and that's where Lan is currently set, even though I've only had one chapter and a very short scene in the middle of another chapter with him so far, following that. And Rand has been or is very soon to be born on the slopes of Dragon Mount, as the prophecies of the Dragon Reborn foretell, which means that this book is set in a very important time and immediately hooked me in, especially given that the first chapter, since we're going to go ahead and start talking about this stuff, the first couple of chapters, I believe, encompass the, what is the second hand Aes Sedai to the Amerlin? I forget what that person's called. The Keeper, I believe. This current Amerlin seat within the story so far is named Tamra, and her Keeper, I forget her name, Gitara, I believe it might be. I forget off the top of my head. I apologize for forgetting that little bit of information. Is an Aes Sedai well known for foretelling a lot of stuff, and as Keeper does a lot of foretelling and writes some of that stuff down. A lot of that material is important, but she dies in chapter 2 of the book with the foretelling of the dragon just about to be reborn, and that's what basically kicks off the book. And right before that is, of course, the land POV, basically setting up for an assault or a defense, to ward off the Aiel that are currently attacking in the region, which really just kind of sets up the stage for the entirety of the book at this point. But that's what starts off the book, and I really, really, really liked that material. I wasn't sure I wasn't even considering like questioning or wondering when it was that New Spring was going to be taking place before I started reading it. But of course, starting to read it and this being the time period in which it takes place only makes sense. Of course, this is when Robert Jordan decided to set the book. I should have known better than to not guess at this point what was going on, but that is what was going on. But from this point, chapter 2 almost through chapter 14, which is as far as I have read so far, so the first 14 chapters, all but chapter 1 have been from Moraine's POV, and one of those chapters was like, about half Moraine's POV, then like 1/4 Swan's POV and 1/4 Land POV. But aside from that one chapter in there and chapter 1, everything else has been from Moraine's POV, following Moraine and Swan as accepted at the start, who are attending the Amerlin and the Keeper when this foretelling that I've just told you about happens, and they're told to keep their mouths shut by the Amerlin herself, and the tower goes on a crusade. That's not really the right or appropriate term in this context, but the White Tower goes on a mission to give bounties to all of the women who have given birth in very recent times, and obviously to give bounties to all the women who are just about to give birth as well, basically is more or less what's going on here. So the task is given to all the accepted to go out and collect names for this reason, and ostensibly it is for the bounty, but what it is really for is the Amerlin is trying to get the names, hoping to some way get the name of the Dragon Reborn and be able to do something with him or about him, knowing the importance of the prophecies of him, that he has to be at, Tarmon Gaiden? I don't even remember the last battle, essentially. Rand has to survive for the last battle, so they're trying to locate him. And that is what we're following through the early portions of this book, is Moraine and Swan being part of gathering names, and then coming back, and instead of being part of gathering names, they're then doing clerical work, rewriting and making some of the chicken scratch and messiness of the names that some of the other accepted have written down to be a little bit neater, and they're using this opportunity to see if they can find logical candidates for who might be the Dragon Reborn. Of course, we're not given anything specifically for Rand himself within the book, unless one of them is meant to be shadowed that way. I don't think any of them are meant to be, because of the circumstances of Rand being found by Tam and taken under his wing, as we're told in the main series, but that's just a random thought that came into my head just now. The point is that this is what the White Tower is doing right now and in this moment. And then over the course of doing some of this, we're told that both Moraine and Swan are within like a month of being eligible, essentially, for being tested to become full Aes Sedai, and that's what happens at one point in the book so far. And that's what happens after, a few days of doing this clerical work, or whatever the time frame is. I'm not 100% certain. I think it was just a few days. Both Moraine and Swan are tested on the same day and raised to be full Aes Sedai. They both choose the blue Aja, and we get a little bit... We get a lot of background into how some of the White Tower and Aes Sedai stuff works in this book through Moraine and Swan, that I really appreciate. Not just how it is different from how some of this material is conveyed and told to us in the main series, such as the Fires of Heaven or the Shadow Rising, which I believe are the two books that contain a lot of material in the White Tower. Maybe it was the Dragon Reborn had a lot about that, but basically the internal politics and the way the White Tower functions, we're given little bits of it in the main series, but this is through the eyes of people who have been in the tower for no time at all and have no idea of how the Aes Sedai function, or how the White Tower functions, how any of this works politically or socially or whatever else you might have in this specific scenario. And that means that it's pretty fresh eyes. We don't have the clearest picture of any of that material. Comparatively, both Moraine and Swan have spent 6 years in the White Tower, so their inherent difference in perspective about the White Tower and how everything functions is a little bit more matured, a little bit more familiar, so we get a little bit more information that makes more sense from this POV of Moraine about the White Tower. Of course, with the testing and stuff like that, in the main series, we've gotten a picture of how both Nynaeve and Egwene were tested and raised from novice to accepted, and that was a big thing that was done in the series, and both of those were done very, very well. We got an idea of how that sort of process works, but we also understand how that sort of a process is different for every person, every Aes Sedai who's in the tower being raised to those positions. We get another similar thing going on in New Spring. Although we don't get Swan's POV about testing to be raised to Aes Sedai, we do get Moraine's, of course, and we see how the process of testing is for here, having to weave 100 specific weavings of the power while undergoing some pretty extreme stimulus and distractions, and in some cases like beatings, injuries that are meant to make you fail to see if you are actually worthy of the shawl of becoming an Aes Sedai. Of course, both Moraine and Swan do pass this, but in the lead up to some of this test, we get some context on Elaida, the first hand to the Queen of Andor in the main series, Elaine's mother, Morghese. So Elaida is a big character within the main series, of course. So getting a little bit of context to her background with this book is also interesting, the same way it is for Moraine and Swan. And as a side note, we also get some stuff about Shiriam and Varen, a couple other Aes Sedai whose names we're familiar with. Not a whole ton on some of these characters, but just enough to be like, hey, I know that name somewhere. But most importantly, Elaida tries to train Moraine and Swan basically by abusing them and beating them while they're doing the 100 weaves, trying to get them to work faster to make sure that they are worthy to actually be raised to full Aes Sedai. And we get a little bit of that bitter feeling that we don't really like this character. At least I don't really like Elaida, and no matter what her motivations are, I don't like them in this book. And of course, Moraine and Swan don't really like her either, but it gives us a precursor to be like, okay, well, what is the testing itself actually going to be like? And then we get the process of the testing with Moraine and the way that those two make it through and are raised to full Aes Sedai. And then, of course, after that, you have a little bit more material following these characters, trying to see if they could get out now to search for Rand, to search for the Dragon Reborn, to find the Dragon Reborn in some capacity themselves, trying to find some ways to see if they can manage to do this. Swan isn't able to do this because she's basically taken under wing of another one of the Blue Aja, who just forces her to do puzzles and stuff like that. To whatever the reasons for that are, I'm not 100% sure, but Swan's otherwise occupied most of the time because of this other Blue Aes Sedai sister. And then Moraine, on the other hand, is given the task of actually divvying out and stamping out approval for the bounties and stuff to start being given by other people. So that's her task, which means she can't really leave the White Tower at this point either. But even so, these two characters, they go dress shopping, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, get some more clothing, and part of why they do this is Moraine, so that she can get some clothing with which that she can escape the White Tower with, to go do her thing at some point when it seems appropriate or possible to go do it. You have some other material about the politics of the White Tower itself with the Blue Aja and these two characters just being inducted into that practicing group, which, is all interesting information, not necessarily 100% relevant, but is good to know anyway. But you do have some other problems with the fact that earlier, before she was raised to full Aes Sedai, and I believe it was just when she came back from yeah, it was just when Swan and Moraine came back from collecting names the first time, that first day that they went to do that. Moraine learns that a few of her uncles have died, and so there's going to be some plotting in Carrion, where she came from, for who's going to be on the throne, because her family has basically ruled the throne for a good long while, and so she suspects that there's going to be some Deus de Mar type stuff going on that's going to try to get her to be the queen over there, even as an Aes Sedai, which is something that she stresses about. And she thinks that this is still a thing, and this is part of why the Amyrlin and everybody else is still trying to keep her in the tower, even after being raised to full sister, because they think that she's going to just be forced to be the queen of Carrion. Compared to Swan, who came from a very different background, and I enjoy being able to see some of the hints of those things with these two characters following them as well, because you don't really get that from the main series. You don't get anything from their background in there. In here, it's pretty cool to get some of that material. But so the point is that Moraine's trying to escape both being inducted into being the Queen of Carrion for some reason, and also trying to be able to do what she wants to do in searching out the Dragon Reborn. That is basically the point that I'm at, except that there's a little bit more. I just finished reading chapter 14, which turned out to be a great stopping spot, not only because it's right before 2 more chapters of Lan POV, so there's a lot of this Moraine material that it was good to get through. Now I'm excited to get to a little bit more Lan at least, but you have some pretty big changes, which is an intentional pun, because chapter 14 is literally called Changes, and chapter 14 changes everything, for lack of a better phrase, because Tamra, the current Aes Sedai, at the point that, up to this point in the book, just dies in her sleep. So there's all of a sudden a new Amyrlin seat that has to be raised. And this new Amyrlin seat is pretty cruel. She's of the Grey Aja, I believe, but is basically more like a red in how she behaves, and both her keeper and the Mistress of Novices, is that what the title is called, it are both reds. So you have a very hostile tower environment, which further encourages Moraine to just leave without saying anything, and she ultimately does. Part of the purpose of the dress shopping that happens in the book is so that she has clothing with which to kind of escape, and that will be suitable for her, and she does that. She goes to do banking stuff, gets money, also collects the dresses, and just leaves. That's the point that chapter 14 ends on. Moraine just leaves, so Swan is left in the tower. Well, we'll see if she gets any POVs or anything like that kind of follow her journey there through the rest of the book. There's not a whole ton of the book left. There's only 120, 130 pages, so we'll see how much ground can be covered. But then you have Moraine having left, like I said, and Lan kind of out there somewhere. So I believe in the last 130 pages of the book, I'm guessing that Moraine and Lan are going to meet up at some point, and that's going to, lead into what eventually becomes her, taking him as her warder. And maybe we'll see a little bit of Swan POV back in the tower, but I don't know how much of this material we're going to get. Maybe some of the material that I'm expecting or thinking that I'm going to get in the rest of this book would have been part of one of the other books in this prequel trilogy, which is super disappointing. But the point is that the material that I've read this week was fantastic. I really enjoyed all of it, and yes, that includes the dress shopping section. For everybody who causes grief or talks about how bad this book is because of dresses or whatever, that chapter is what you guys are complaining about? Seriously? I didn't even realize I was neck deep into the dress shopping chapter until I was almost all the way done with the chapter, and I was like, oh wait, I'm in the chapter that everybody talks about and craps on. And it's not bad. It's not bad at all. People complaining about it, I don't get it. That's just my take on it. I genuinely don't understand the complaints with this book, because everything about it has been really great. Even the dress shopping, and the dress shopping was plot relevant, so even if it was maybe a little bit mediocre compared to everything else, which I don't necessarily think is the case, but even if you felt that way, it's still relevant, so I don't see the reason to complain too much about it. Either way, I've been really enjoying the book, and it's a little bit of a surprise. I expected to like it. I didn't think I would dislike it, because I haven't disliked any of the Wheel of Time books so far, but I've liked it a lot more than I thought I would, even still. So, if it continues on at this rate and I enjoy it at the end as much as I'm enjoying it now, I think where I'm going to place it in my Wheel of Time ranking might be a little bit controversial, not like super controversial, not any more controversial than The Shadow Rising being my least favorite so far, at least, but that is where I'm at with the book. So that's a little bit more than halfway through the first 14 chapters read. I'm going to be reading the last 11 chapters plus the epilogue over the course of the rest of this week, because I'm recording this on Monday and the video comes out Thursday, so Tuesday through Friday basically are probably when I'm going to finish the book. I would be very surprised if I was not done with this book on Friday. So it'll probably be the case that I finish on Friday, I record next week's diary on Friday, and have it ready to come out, nearly a week later. And that's probably going to be the way things go. But thank you for checking out this video if you did. Thank you for following along with the Wheel of Time Diaries if you have. And if you haven't, all those videos are still up and available. So if you want to get an idea of my journey with the series up to this point in the form of 5 diaries for Eye of the World, 4 diaries for Great Hunt, 3 diaries for The Dragon Reborn, and then I believe like somewhere in the realm of like 8 or 9 diaries each for The Shadow Rising and The Fires of Heaven. Those are all still up on the channel, so you can definitely follow my journey along there, and then continue following along with the rest of the series as I finish this book next week in that diary. Like I said, thank you again for watching. I'll be back in the next video, whatever that may be.